All right. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Fred. How are you today?
I'm very good, thank you. Today, I think we have an amazing session because we are introducing the new web page of Trinity.
Hmm.
So um, I think actually that this is a better, more refined message, just to make 100% clear what is Trinity, how it works. Last week we did introduction of which all the elements that forms Trinity, and
Hmm.
today we can have it publicly for everybody to pick in the webpage. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share the screen,
Yeah,
and I'm going to share here now, and here's the brand new webpage. Ta-da!
great.
Perfect. And let me hide these things because, oops, um, there you are. So it's full screen now. Right, perfect.
Great.
So, so it's all connected finally. Simpler than
That's
that.
right. That's got to be our message, quite frankly, because I think that we are delivering an evolution
Yeah,
of enterprise software to the market based on the requirements that we're seeing out there, especially compliance, sustainability, ESG. Some places it's mandated, and in other places there are other kinds of compliance frameworks and stuff like that that are
yeah,
becoming increasingly important to stakeholders, to investors, to customers, etc. And yet there's very few solutions out there where it's integrated into the whole platform.
yeah,
And our next session, not today, but our next session, I want to talk about that integration and what drove us to deliver the product that we're delivering.
yeah,
Today, I really wanted to talk about the 90 days to certainty
yeah.
because I thought that that was an excellent idea of yours.
Thank you.
And aside from going through the rest of the content, I
Mm,
will make a special note about your session coming up in Stockholm. I think that's
yeah,
really cool.
we have it
I
here
encourage
too.
people, yeah, go to our website and link through and check it out. But today I wanted to talk about the 90 days to certainty.
Yeah, and it is very
Okay.
important because there's a lot of background there to cover. Let me hide this thing. So, very quickly on the web page. So it's a very, oops, what happened here? There you are. Um, yeah, this is very representative of what Trinity is. So it's all joined, it's all connected. I think that the design also represents that. So it's very clear what actually is very hard to express in words. What is a company that everybody talks about a single source of truth, and it's so hard to represent that what for the complexities that companies have. So and a typical
Mm,
SME, we have as much complexity and back and forwards as a large enterprise, and connecting all these things today is all pretty much bolt on with spreadsheets, or still people making notes on papers and post it and send it over to colleagues by email too. And that it really is hard to put together.
yeah.
How
Look,
complex is that?
this was a research driven uh, conclusion
Yeah,
is that the business models of SMEs and mid-market companies, the business models,
yeah,
the requirements, the outputs are every bit as complex as any huge multinational.
yeah,
And yet the systems that they can afford on scale, right?
yeah,
And it's a question of scale. They need the same complexities
yeah,
than the larger enterprises. And yet there are fewer tools at the price point that gives them an ROI.
yeah,
Um, and it's unlikely that they've got the budget to support massive, you know, implementations of traditional ERP
yeah,
systems that the big multinationals and enterprises can afford.
yeah,
And so that's why I noticed a huge gap in the market there in terms of them needing complexity, but they haven't reached a scale where a lot of the tools that work on that complexity level are affordable to them.
Yeah. And I think here I'm going to you're talking about ERP, but this is two elements that I
Well, I'm
love.
actually talking about all three.
Yeah.
Governance, risk, and compliance systems are typically targeting the larger organization.
Yeah.
EAM, enterprise grade platforms, are typically targeting larger organizations. And ERPs, the big blue chip name brands, are definitely targeting the larger
Yeah.
enterprises.
And I think actually companies have apps, I would say, with CMMSs or EAMs that are
Yeah.
siloed, that actually are pretty much phone apps. If you not to dismerit their function, but when you try to bring those up into this space, that start to get challenging.
Yeah,
And
there's a
we are not
quantum
even
leap
mentioning
between.
that space because then we are getting into a bigger conversation. And this is something that actually Trinity is today.
Yeah,
Um,
there's a
is
big leap between a CMMS and an EAM platform.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I think actually the platform today it brings all the three together in one single place. You don't need to
Yeah.
go into one and patch it to this one and the other and patch it to this one. It's only one single platform. Oh, that's got to get messy. It's one
Yeah.
single platform, as the logo shows, that connects everything in the same platform. So you don't need other licenses, other softwares. Or you might decide actually utilize certain sections.
Yep.
Right. So we leave actually I think we need to discover the people what is the web page, all the stats that we put together. We have it take a peek here. But here is something that actually is the main thing that we want to discuss today or we share with
Yeah.
everybody. And if you allow me, I'm going to walk through how this come through. Um, many years in software sales in large international companies, SMEs, very specific software that actually people may not know publicly because actually is I wouldn't say exclusive, but it was designed for massive data lakes, like a government managing
Mm.
extremely high volumes of data or companies across the globe, etc., etc. You can imagine a large national supermarket. Their fidelity card or numbers, whatever it's called in any country, where you pick your card and say, and they take this information and start to make customized offers for every single customer according to the points that you collect. That is a
Mm.
massive task. So, but that complexity also exists in small companies, but perhaps it's not perceived as a complexity that had to be handled. Now,
Mm.
what's going on with this? Um, if you look into the sales cycle of any organization today, and if you are today a decision maker, a buyer, or somebody that need to find a solution, what you will find in the market is like a 50 shades of gray. And I mean that actually next company to next one is pretty much which is the difference. And then you spend more time investigating, trying to understand which is the difference between one and the other. And particularly now with AI, it start to get more challenging because actually they go and the comparisons start to get more trickier. Because at the end, the solutions are very close to each other. So it address very specific things. It doesn't address the operation of the company as Trinity does, like it works on in the ERP side, the EAM side, and the governs risk and compliance.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that actually you don't need another demo as a buyer or as a decision maker or looking into solution. I don't think that you need another demo. I don't think you need another proof of concept. I don't think that it's needed another way to see the things that actually to start to do comparison one to the other. And we said, what if we put the risk on us? Say we're not going to try to compete against other people trying to sell you the same thing. What we have is something unique that address three different specific areas of a business that need to be operational to have the certainty. So we go and deploy. Literally, we deploy the software, and then you start to see the ROI right in front of you without the risk of make a financial commitment. And here we know many stories about that actually software implementations take, I don't know, 60 to 75%. It's not fully deployed ever because it's not really addressing the requirements of the customers, or have been kind of halfway addressed, but actually at the time of the deployment, they realized that it's something that actually is not really what was discussed at the beginning, and it starts to get kind of a complex. But we want to de-risk all this for a company, to organization. We say, we are going to deploy it. You don't have to make an investment, rather than the commitment to work with us, doing your part of the equation, to show you that in 90 days you get a return of investment of what we said that we are going to deliver, based on a very, very how I can put it, subjective survey that we do at the very beginning, to make sure that actually everybody's on the same page. We know exactly which is the pacing that we're going to get. It's a very, very strong statement of work, meaning that actually this is what we're going to deliver, in which time frame, etc. And probably you can explain a bit more about what is a statement of work and how it works and why it's required, not for this particular program, but for an organization to look into this. If they don't have statement of work, might be a good idea to start to think about them, even if you're deploying other things actually as an added value for us. This is our gift today, if you may.
Yeah. Okay. I think that experience, having many years, many projects under your belt, that basically informs how well you construct a scope of work.
Yeah.
That's what I believe. I think the SOW, the tender process of a lot of enterprise software implementations, it's not based on enough research or enough understanding of the business model that you're serving. Right. I also think that there is an expense during the implementation phases to the company, regardless of the license fees, right? They have to invest in change management, and that can be a significant expense, especially if they're looking at long, drawn out project cycles, right? By doing the 90-day program, which is basically going to be us telling you what we can deliver within that 90 days, right? Based on a detailed survey of the customer and their needs and their expectations, telling them what we are confident that we can deliver as a fixed tender for a particular project. Right? That doesn't mean we can guarantee an ROI in 90 days. What it means is that every customer ROI is defined differently. They might get a return from various different things. And in order to set up a system, it's going to be based on their priorities. Now, if they are a company that has 10,000 physical assets, it's very difficult to embrace 10,000 different kinds of assets within a 90-day period, plus, 100,000 stock items, plus, maybe multiple frameworks and strategic this and that and the other. All of that within 90 days is unlikely. But we do know that we can do something to establish trust in that 90 days, right? And I believe that establishing trust is the most critical feature there, is being a business partner with them. And it comes down to ethics. I think that with our 90-day program, we're taking an ethical stance, that we want to de-risk the decision-making, meaning that you're going to know what you're getting long before you commit to an invoice and long before you commit to training all of your people. So of course, there's going to be people involved in doing the implementation up to a particular point, but it's not going to be every single user in your organization until you've pulled the trigger and said, this is what we agreed on. This is what we need in order to get ROI. Look, you can't promise ROI. If a company is not executing correct maintenance, right? And so everything is running inefficiently and things are breaking down and stuff like that, best practices and that kind of thing are being disregarded. Well, in that case, you might be increasing their on-hand stock to prepare for emergency repairs, or you might be increasing the amount they invest in maintenance to get an eventual payout in terms of extending asset useful life and stuff like that. So they might see their ROI come, in different ways. And it really depends on the customer. So it's kind of like somebody asking me exactly what am I getting out of it. Well, that's like asking me how long is a piece of string, right? I can't possibly give you an answer without looking at the string, right? Or how deep is a hole? I don't know. Let me see the hole. I can give you an estimate, right? Anyway, look, and when you've written enough tenders, when you know your product really well, when you've seen enough business models, you start to gain some confidence as professionals. And if you accompany that with ethics, giving this 90-day program out of respect to the customer in an industry where you're typically having to put down 50% invoice up front, right? In spite of the fact that our industry is notoriously and dismally delivered really poor performance in terms of enterprise software implementations. All right. It's almost like a commonly accepted thing that I refuse to accept, right? 50 to 70% failure rates for projects that are technical in nature. Now, there's multiple reasons why those failure rates occur. Failure to get buy-in, right? Failure to get top-down adoption of the system, a misunderstanding of the requirements of the business, failure to define scope and allowing scope creep to come in without managing it carefully through change management, et cetera, et cetera. If a customer wants to move the target, that should be perfectly fine, but it should be recognized, right? Improper risk management throughout the project, not disclosing to the customer that you're experiencing risks in relation to the project implementation. I could go on and on and on all day. But basically, when you've got a product that has a whole bunch of technical features and you know what you can do within a certain time frame, there's only so much you should really, anybody who promises a big bang implementation, they don't know what they're doing. It's a really bad idea. Big mistake. That's where a lot of the failures come from, that 50 to 70%, is people who try the big bangs, right? And I believe that our offer, whilst it's, a bit of a risk to us as well, we know what we're doing, right? It's a calculated
we are putting,
risk.
It's all risk on us. Well, it's as a conversation. Who is it responsible of the conversation? 100% each side, because I'm responsible for my message and my way to deliver, and the other way are the same. So I think it's an investment from both sides in terms of, say, are we committed before issuing invoices, et cetera, et cetera. But we are upfronting everything. So the software, the man hours, everything, just before any. But I think actually I want to rescue something that you mentioned you there in terms of ethics. What a project actually, and this is something actually when I mentioned the 50 shades of gray in the market, I think that actually this is rooted in something that is very, very experienced. So it's not something actually is a theory or a hypothesis. It's something that you really experience as a work ethic in your life. So it's something actually you can demonstrate through real experience.
Of course. Look, I've held a position when it came to technology, a very unpopular position for some time now, where I believe that the damage you can do to an organization, which ultimately impacts people and families and environments and all that other kind of stuff, right? But the impact you can have on an operation is equivalent to the impact that an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor can have on the quality of people's lives,
Yeah.
right? I believe that we can go in there, be given trust, and cause a lot of damage. And yet there is no global licensing mechanism. There is no Hippocratic oath for technology practitioners.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's been raised a few times historically. It's ultimately been decided it was just far too complex to address
Yeah.
so many areas of technology and that kind of stuff. So there's certifications here and there, but you know, not similar to like the Hippocratic oath for technology practitioners, right? That you make an oath to not intentionally do any harm, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I've spoken about that even in a chamber of commerce, and you know, I heard crickets in reply because there were a bunch of technology people. They didn't want to hear about the concept of applied ethics, but I've maintained that position for my entire professional career. That, you know, uncompromising, and sometimes it doesn't do you any favors. I believe I really love the 90-day program because it's an expression, it's not a gimmick, it's an expression of our ethical stance. That the relationship is more important than the money, than the features, than the technology, right? And without the customer's participation, even if they hand you a big deposit, if they're not on board, if you don't have a partnership, then the technology is going to be serving no purpose ultimately. I'm aware of multi-million-dollar implementations that have gone nowhere, and they could have been managed differently. I'm not going to get into names and stuff like that, but I can tell you a little bit of a story from my past. Do you remember the Y2K scare?
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember.
This was back in 1999, and I was in Indonesia here, where I'm currently residing. And I was invited to participate in a tender to a large multinational oil and gas company. They saw the news. Their executives were reading the doomsayers. Right? There was a lot of fear mongering, I thought. Because technically, if you understand what Y2K was really all about, I considered it low risk. You know, take a look at your system. Anyway, I was invited to do a tender. They invited a number of people to tender on their Y2K mitigation project to make sure, right. Well, I took a look at what they were working for. You know, they had an old accounting system. They had some other systems out in the field, et cetera, et cetera. Just took a look across them. And none of them would be impacted by the 2-digit date versus 4-digit date situation. It was just that simple. It was a technical fact. I showed up in the boardroom without any presentation, without any papers, nothing. And I said, you don't need to do anything. My project proposal is do nothing. You know, I understand that you're nervous. Trust me, you're not at risk. Right. They questioned my expertise, and I explained to them what the actual technical issue was. And that anything else they had heard was not the truth. This was the actual issue. Right. So if you were a library with, you know, calculating late fees, and you had a very, very old software program, you might suddenly, on the change of the calendar, owe a bunch of people late fees as opposed to them owing it to you. Something, you know, there's conceivable situations, right, where it could have, but it was very, in reality, it was very limited in scope on systems that it impacted. So I was certain. Now, I knew that this was an opportunity to make a significant amount of capital. As an independent consultant, I would have been securing employment for 6 to 8 months, hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? But the fact is that I just couldn't stand the idea of selling a solution to them to a problem that didn't exist. Right. So I said, there's no problem. Don't worry about it. And one guy made some smart ass remark about how I didn't know what the hell I was talking about. And I said, well, if it'll make you feel better, just turn your servers off at 11:59 and turn them back on at 12:01. it won't make any difference, but that's the best.
Yeah.
It'll make you feel better, you know. I said, because technically there's nothing that we can do. No.
Yeah.
We were told we needed to do this and buy new that and spend money here and look
Yeah.
at all this stuff. And we were expecting a proper plan, and this isn't professional. Anyway, they basically kicked me out of a
Yeah.
boardroom of a multinational that I had already done projects for.
Yeah.
And that was why I was invited to that tender,
Yeah.
because I'd done successful projects for them before. Well, my name was mud in the small professional community in a very, very big city.
Yeah.
You know, your reputation is very, very important.
Brilliant.
I was considered, unskilled. I was ostracized, basically. It had a heavy consequence.
Yeah.
And nobody who was working in the Y2K space wanted anything to do with me, because they were profiting from this
Yeah.
situation,
Yeah.
right? Now, the clock turns over. People are waiting to see, the ones who didn't spend all that money, what's
Yeah.
going to happen to them? Nothing. Bupkis. Zero happened. Within about 60 days, it was recognized by those executives who had sat in that boardroom and approved the tender and spent a few $100,000
Yeah.
to go across all their sites, in country and out, that they had basically spent their money for nothing.
Yeah.
So what did those people do? I don't know what they did during that time, but I know a lot of money changed hands. A lot of money flew around, right?
Yeah.
That's why I don't want to name any names or anything like that. But ultimately, it was only then it was recognized that really, amongst all of their outreach,
Yeah.
only one person had told them,
No need to do
because
anything.
I would rather, it's an ethical stance,
Yeah.
to not do any harm. I'm not going to take money for something that I can't possibly improve,
Yeah.
right? It's a ridiculous concept to me. The managing by scope of work, risk management, change requests, understanding what the customer is investing in terms of their change management, just to even participate, and respecting that and their decision-making process. But then what? Hold them ransom by charging them 50% up front?
Yeah.
It's it really is unconscionable. It's why I only give fixed price quotes. When I was a consultant, I only ever gave fixed price quotes, and then I'll manage the scope, right? A change request that increases the scope, that's going to increase the cost, right?
Right.
But at least they know they're making that decision.
Yeah.
Anyway, my name was mud for months. And I couldn't get anyone to take my calls for probably a good 6 months. And then Y2K passed. And then within a couple of months, I couldn't fall on the sidewalk without a job in the same town.
Yeah.
And it came about, I had I ran into a different situation altogether shortly thereafter. A very influential, political figure in another country.
Yeah.
Had a relationship with somebody in, the city where I was living, and they knew each other. Anyway, the guy was going to invest in ERP, which was not very common, late 90s, early 2000s in Asia Pacific. He wanted to invest in ERP, and he was looking at various systems, and he had overseas consultants coming in to give tenders. And he wanted somebody he could trust to review those tenders.
Yeah.
And through a connection and relationships, it's a very small world, but I wouldn't want to have to paint it, right? My name came up, and I was flown in country to review the tenders.
Yeah.
Right. And so because of my stance on Y2K, there was automatic trust there.
Right.
It wasn't my version of the truth versus their version of the truth. Look, ultimately what I found, I would have been happy to recognize a good tender. What I recognized was a tender where it was purposely manipulated, the numbers and the time frames. Yeah. So that by the time that customer realized how much it's really going to cost, which
Right.
was
Right.
approximately double, at least double.
Yeah.
Well, maybe more like 150% more than what they were agreeing to pay for the solution,
Yeah.
right? But by the time they would find that out, they would really be too far into the schedule to easily walk away without accepting a huge financial loss
They
to the
couldn't walk
company.
away.
Yeah, there's a walkaway point with these kinds
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
things, right? And um, a lot of people, that's a psychological barrier for them. Is once they've reached a certain
Yeah. Yeah.
point, they're not going to just take the loss. They'll
Yeah.
stick with it and stick with it and stick with it, and that could drag on for quite some time before they finally look at the final price tag, and it's like,
Yeah.
wow, holy crap! I thought I was going to get all of this value for less than half that price. The ROI is shot to hell,
Yeah.
right? Anyway, I thought it looked purposeful. From the questions he was asked by that provider, he agreed with me, right? Because they'd been asking about his budget and, walk away point and milestones and all that other kind of stuff.
Right.
So it was almost like they had purposely set it up so that he would be beyond his walkaway point before they hit a particular milestone for him
Right. Right.
to walk away. Anyway, he was furious, had them deported and blacklisted from the
Wow.
country immediately. Uh, I couldn't. He was a very well-connected guy, not somebody to mess
Yeah.
with. And he was already, he didn't want to be treated like a, third world kind of
Right. Right. Right.
country by these first world players coming into
Yeah.
town, right? Anyway, so that's two sides of it. One side that, of taking an ethical stance. I still take that same stance. And then seeing the other side of the coin, right? How
Yeah.
how how frustrating it can be for people to trust.
Yeah.
When people are willing to go in, they're going to be in your office. They got to
Yeah.
face you every day, and yet they would still be willing, in order to close the deal, to, you know, take that big deposit.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
conscious of time,
Anyway,
Richard, but I think actually that's absolutely a fantastic representation of what is the ethos, let's say.
the
Uh,
ethos. Yeah.
yeah, what drives Trinity. This is why we have this 90-day certainty program. This is because we, you clearly, the example I think that cannot be clearer, and in terms of a conduct. So it's an ethical conduct that actually drives everything. It's not just a marketing gimmick, if you may. It's something that is an ethical, um, yeah, an ethical conduct, and it's
It's
very
a
hard to
stand.
find these things today.
We're taking a stand,
Yeah,
even if there's a consequence. We're taking the stand anyway.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So we're not going to go through, probably one day we should go through all the phases if somebody's interested or they can connect with us directly. But I think that that's the introduction today to the new webpage and what are why we are doing the things that we are doing today, and
Mm.
particularly introducing this 90-day certainty program. And thank you
Yeah.
very much again, and thank you for sharing that story, because I think that clearly
Well,
represents what it is.
I thought it was an excellent idea that you had to actually, how do we show the market
Yeah,
that we're willing to earn trust,
yeah,
right? And I think it was an excellent idea. I support it wholeheartedly because it speaks
yeah,
from my particular ethics.
yeah,
And I believe that if you can't manage it successfully after that, then you need more skill.
yeah. Fantastic. Okay, so we'll regroup again next week. Probably we can go, and yeah, we have some specifics about compliance, I think, next week.
Yeah. Our next session is going to be basically introducing, the evolution
Mm,
of inclusive governance, risk, and compliance
right.
in enterprise software. I believe
Yeah.
that it's an evolution, it's a response. We may be one of the first ones, but I believe that it's a necessary response. and we can get into my theories on that later on.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Richard, and see you next week then.
Thanks, Frank. Talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.